Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. Halacha 5, Chapter 1. And today in the Mishnah, we're going to be covering the proper way to perform the mitzvah of Peah and how the tithing is going to work. And the first part of the sugya today is going to be getting into the differences between Bikkorim and Peah. So we know that the optimal way to leave Peah is to leave the portion of the field uncut, and that way people can come and harvest it. But what happens if they did not do the mitzvah like that? Well, the mitzvah of Peah still remains in effect, and the owner then has to designate a portion of the cut crop as Peah and give it to the poor. So now the Mishnah is going to get into what happens with the Meiser status of Peah given from harvested produce, because we know that in some of the cases that Peah is not subject to Meisros, but there's going to come times when if it's not done right and things are done out of order, it can become subject to Meisros. So we have a rule in the Torah that the tithes have to be done in order, and we see that in all of the Masechtot in Zerayim. You have to do them in order, and you really create a lot of problems when things are done out of order. But it's actually one of the commandments in the Torah. It's one of the mitzvot to do it in order. This is going to be a case where things are out of order and how to rectify it and how to deal with it. So the Mishnah starts. It says, one gives produce as Peah always. The always here is going to be key. There's going to be a lot of ways to interpret the way always here. So one gives produce as Peah always, even after the crop has been cut, and he's exempt from the Meiser obligations on it, until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. So the first part, we know that when it's left in the field or it's cut and maybe it's put on the wall, that the Peah is exempt from Meiser. And that the issue is going to come that, well, wait a second, what happens when you smooth your crop? You've gathered it and you winnow it and you bring it to the threshing floor and you start to make it into a pile. You take away all the chaff and separating the wheat from the chaff, and now you're pulling out the final wheat berries, these little products that you're going to be turning into flour. You've smoothed it. Well, somewhere in there you still have the pay obligation, but now it's been smoothed. So before he was obligated to leave Peah, but it wouldn't be Meiser. But now once he smooths it, says the Mishnah, he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. Now it's going to become obligated, and we have to be careful, because now what happens is if you're smoothing something and then you're now taking it out to leave it to the poor, you're now taking away from Meisros. So you're now taking away from what theoretically should be going to the Levi or the Cohen. Beforehand, when it's in the field, you're separating it out as Peah and it's exempt. But now that you've smoothed it, you've effectively have a part of it now that when the poor person gets the Peah, he has to separate out the Peah from it. So the poor person gets less produce because it has to be separated, and in a way you're taking away also from the Levim Kohen, because you're taking something that for counting the total that should be separated. So you have some two-way issues on it. Um, the Mishnah continues. It says, and one may give produce as hefker, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligation on it until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. So that is going to come up from Maestros 1:1. And basically, that's saying that the produce is declared ownerless prior to the smoothing of it. By the way, that smoothing process where you're separating the wheat and the chaff and you're winnowing it and you're making all the chaff go away and you're just leaving it for the wheat berries so that you can go and turn it into flour, that's called meruach. So the smoothing process is exempt from the Meiser obligation for the same reason that Peah is exempt, because it is produce to which the Levi has the same rights as anyone else. And this talked about in Maestros 1:1. The produce that was declared ownerless after the smoothing, however, has already become subject to the Meiser obligation since it was privately owned when the smoothing was made on it. And the owner's later renunciation of his ownership of it does not remove these obligations. Therefore, that somebody who acquires this produce from Hefker is still going to be required to tithe it. In other words, you have a case where the owner of the grain didn't leave the peah he was supposed to. Now he goes and he smooths it, and now he's designating this tithe out to either be Hefker or peah, so that he's basically ceding the ownership of it. Except that you have a rule from the Torah that once it's been smoothed, that now it's subject to tithing. So again, this is now after it's already been made into Hefker. Now it's going to be subject to tithing because it went into the possession of the owner. It was in the owner's possession. The owner transferred it into this status by smoothing it. And now if he goes and puts it into Hefker, now it's going to become obligated. By the way, if you want to just pause for a second and try to guess who this anonymous Mishnah is, you'll never guess. So as a game, if you want to try to guess who this anonymous Mishnah is, you're going to, kudos if you get it. Anyway, let me read the Mishnah again and you can see if you can guess who this anonymous Mishnah is. It says that, and one who gives produce as Hefker, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligation on it until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. Later on in this year, I'll give you the answer who says it. But again, write down the answer the guess that you have. But I'd be amazed if you got it. If you get it, kudos. That's really great. Anyway, getting back to this, there's a major dispute among the Rishonim whether this exemption is going to apply to produce brought before the smoothing or after the smoothing. Some of the people like in the Tosfot from Baba Metzia 88a and the Bavli are going to hold the view that this applies only to produce that's purchased before the smoothing, and the obligation to tithe produce declared Hefker after the smoothing is a biblical one. So according to that view, the exemption applies to purchases made after smoothing. In the Baba Metzia, the obligation to tithe produce declared Hefker after Meruach, the smoothing, and then acquired by someone else cannot be biblical, says the Bavli, because what is acquired from Hefker after the smoothing is no different than what is acquired through the purchase after smoothing. And accordingly, we have to say that in the Mishnah's ruling that the Hefker after the smoothing is subject to Meiser only to Rabbanan. But either way, you have some disagreement on this as to at which step is this going to be D'Rabbanan, and which step is this going to be D'Oraita. The Mishnah is going to continue. It's going to say, we may feed untithed produce to a domesticated animal, to an undomesticated animal, and to birds, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligation until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. So, something to note that, normally untithed produce is not biblically forbidden for consumption as tevel until the processing is finished. In other words, it's smoothed. And that's why the rabbis, they said you can't use it to eat a regular meal until it's tithed, but you're allowed to snack from it. We know that from two Mishnahs, the Mishnahs in Trumos 8.3 and the Mishnah in Maestros 2.1. And this Mishnah is coming to teach that the rabbinic prohibition of regular meals pertains only to human consumption. But with regards to birds or feeding these animals, that it is not that has not been finished is permitted, and that's because we're treating the animal consumption here as a form of snacking. One of the things is take a note is that it's really not normal to be taking good finished human food and feeding it to animals. It's not a normal occurrence. So that's why you have this status. The other thing to keep in mind is that we're required to let an animal that's working to snack. So we know that perhaps you're using an animal to carry the food to the threshing floor, and the animal wants to eat some of it, even though it is human consumption. You have to let it. It's a rule in the Torah, and it's a halacha in the Torah, and it's one of the 613 mitzvot, and it's considered to be cruel if not. So if you were to come along and say that, no, I've already gathered this together and I'm using this ox to transport it and I'm not going to let it snack on it because I have to tithe it, then you come to violate that rule in the Torah to try to let the animal snack while it's working. So this is a way where things stay reconciled, so that it's not because it's not obligated to tithing yet, the animal can still snack on it. That's something that's worth noting. So the Mishnah continues and it says, and one may take produce from the threshing floor and plant it, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligation until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. We know that reading the Mishnah is something that a lot of times is like a puzzle. So Rabbi Akiva here can be talking about it in terms of what is D'Rabbanan and what is D'Oraita. So D'Rabbanan, the sages come along and say that these things are supposed to be tithed, even if you're going to be planting it as seeds. But D'Oraita, it's allowed, D'Rabbanan, that you have to come along and do it. So it could be a case where Rabbi Akiva is making that clarification and not coming up with his own ruling that contradicts what the sages are saying. He might be making a point for clarification. That might be one way to read it. Another thing, that these earlier rulings in the Mishnah, they were stated anonymously, and again, we're playing a game where you get to write down who you think said this anonymously. The answer is going to be coming, and again, write it down because you'll be amazed if you can get it. If you can get it, you get a gold star. But anyway, Rabbi Akiva's individual view here is going to be limited to this last ruling about planting, and the Mishnah is attributing this ruling to Rabbi Akiva, and it implies that maybe the rabbis do disagree. The Rosh Cirillo here is saying that they maintain that one is rabbinically forbidden to plant even produce that has not yet undergone smoothing without first tithing it. That's in Maestros 5.1. And the reason for this is that allowing untithed produce to be planted can result in a large scale loophole, and consequently it can lead to a large scale loss of miser for the levim. Remember, we were talking about that you have this status of the crop that you're trying to rectify, and if you do it the wrong way, either you're causing a loss for people for peah, or the other way, you're causing a loss for what would be maestros. So if you go one way and you're overdoing it, you're taking away from what would go to levim ultimately. And if after you're smoothing it and effectively you're taking all this produce in and you're effectively giving more to what would be going to the levim, and then you're separating out the peah, you're actually giving a smaller amount of peah to the poor. You're giving a greater amount to levim, but you're actually detracting from the amount that you'd be giving in peah. And then if you're going to go ahead and you're going to now start to, because you're doing it out of order, you're going to start to say, okay, well, now I'm going to give, so that I can end up in this 1/60th amount, I'm going to give a greater amount and then separate it out for peah. I'm going to give a greater amount after it's been smoothed. Now you've so that your peah can end up to be 1/60th. Now you've ended up taking away miser from the cone again. So you got a problem if you're doing this out of order. And the same too with using it in these other applications, like in seeds. You also have an issue. You're going to be allowed to biblically go ahead and do that for seeds, but there's a prohibition d'Rabbanan because they were worried about cheaters coming along, and they had to make this rule d'Rabbanan because you'd have cheaters coming in and doing all this. They'd go and they'd do their regular business with untithed produce to sell as seeds for farms for future seasons without anything going for maestros. And now you're taking away from the levim. And that's what they're dealing with here. They're trying to close up this loophole. And again, it's a loophole in terms of if you're doing it the way you're supposed to do it, there's not going to be a problem. But if you have dishonest people that are cheaters in business and in life, and they're playing games with the Torah, you're going to end up with these people exploiting the system and cheating. And that's part of what the problem is here. Because again, you're dealing with a different generation that started to become dishonest in how they were doing their business. The rabbis are not concerned in the case of the hefker because declaring one's produce ownerless is a rare occurrence. In other words, if you have a lot of like very nice wheat and you ended up processing it and then you just leave it as hefker, you've already taken the effort to come and haul it and harvest it, and then you're leaving it as hefker, not peah but hefker. That's very rare. So that's why hefker is not included in this Mishnah here. In this case, they were not concerned in the case of peah because there is an obligation to give peah, and the levim are thus not losing anything that should rightfully come their way, says the Rosh Cirillo. The rabbis are also unconcerned about feeding untithed produce to animals, presumably because one does not regularly feed produce fit for humans to animals. Therefore, feeding it to an animal is no different from the irregular eating, snacking that the rabbis permitted to people, even people, before they do the smoothing. So the above explanation assumes that the rabbis are going to disagree with Rabbi Akiva only on a rabbinic level. But again, there may be another way to read it where maybe Rabbi Akiva is just making a clarification. Maybe there's not a disagreement, but perhaps there is. So the rest of the Mishnah is going to continue. And the first part of the rest of the Mishnah is going to be pretty obvious. It says the Mishnah now is going to list these two other ways in which the law regarding maestros is affected by meruach, the smoothing. So it says, a Kohen and a Levi who brought untithed produce from the threshing floor. He purchased untithed produce from the threshing floor. The tithes that must be separated from that produce, are theirs to keep until the produce has been heaped into piles and smoothed. That's pretty straightforward. In other words, although you have this rabbinic system, Pnei Moshe, although you have this rabbinic requirement for Levim and Kohanim who purchase untithed produce to give Truma and Meiser, they separate from it to other Kohanim and Levim, not themselves, but to other ones. The Mishnah is teaching that this requirement applies only to produce that's purchased after the smoothing, but the produce that they buy before the smoothing is not subject to this rule. So that seems very straightforward. That makes a lot of sense. But now the Mishnah is going to come and say, well, what happens about if part of it is now consecrated to the temple? So if one consecrates his produce and then redeems it, he is subject to the Meiser obligations until the temple treasurer heaped it into a pile and smoothed it. So now comes the wrinkle where it gets a little bit complicated. So in Devarim 18:4 and in 14:23, the word the Torah is going to use is deganecha, meaning your finished grain. And the sages are going to understand that only grain whose production is completed while it is still yours, while you still have ownership of it, is subject to Truma and Meiser, and not grain that is finished while it is in the possession of Hekdesh. That's in Maestros 1:1. In other words, now if somebody dedicates it to the temple and it's going to get smoothed and the temple is going to own it, temple is going to smooth it, that then does not get subject to Truma and Meiser. Because again, the Torah is using the word deganecha, your finished grain. It's in your possession. It's not in the temple's possession. It's in your possession. So that that if you're consecrating the produce while it's still growing or after it's been cut, but before the smoothing, and the temple officials complete its production and they heap it into a pile and smooth it, the produce, it never becomes subject to Meiser. In other words, it never became deganecha. It never became your grain. It was in the possession of the temple. So it's hekdesh. So therefore, if the grower is redeeming it before the temple officials can smooth it, and then he makes the smoothing himself, he becomes subject to the Meiser obligation, since that production is finished while you still have ownership of it. So the fact that the produce had at one point belonged to Hekdesh is not a factor. So perhaps the Kohen, perhaps the Kohen purchased it from the temple, which they're allowed to do, and then went and smoothed it. So the fact that you had this one point where the temple owned it, and then they got ownership of it, and then they smoothed it. It doesn't mean that it would be that it wouldn't be subject to maestros on it, to Truma and Meiser. But if it happened all within the process of the temple owning it and smoothing it themselves, then that would be the case. So it's a question of when the possession occurs and when the owner is redeeming it and smoothing it. So that's going to be the Mishnah. Now we're going to get into this whole thing about Peah versus Bikkorim. And the Gemara is going to try to get an understanding of Peah by looking at Bikkorim, looking at the differences, and it's going to give us an understanding of what's happening with both Bikkorim and Peah in a way that is really unique to this halacha. So the Mishnah states that one gives produce as Peah always. So that, in other words, that that he is exempt from Meiser until he smooths a pile. And the Mishnah has taught that if the Peah is first designated after the smoothing, it is subject to the Meiser. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about this issue with regarding Bikkorim. So, in other words, what's going to happen if after it's smooth, what's going to happen with Bikkorim? Rabbi Yossi, the Sugya says, Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zavdi, who says in the name of Rabbi Abahu, and so said Rabbi Nehemiah of Mar Ukvan, and some inclined that it was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, quote, if one separated Bikkorim from a smooth pile of grain, he is exempt from separating Truma Gadola for it. So we know that Bikkorim is the first fruits of the 7 species from Eretz Yisrael, and that they're supposed to be designated while they're still attached to the ground. That's in the Mishnah of Bikkorim 3:1. So what happens in the same case? What happens if somebody, like with the Peah, he harvests the field without first designating the Bikkorim, as he's required to do? The Bikkorim is supposed to be 1/60th also. And then he cuts the produce as Bikkorim. In other words, after the fact, he comes and he designates it after the fact. Again, this big problem of what happens if you're doing tithes out of order, which is why the Torah commands you to do it in order. So if people did things in order, we wouldn't have to worry about all these complicated puzzles. But this really is designed to teach us, to show that, yeah, you really need to consider tithes in order. Really, you can't do it out of order because you make a big mess for yourself and for everybody. So the Truma Gadola is the Truma where somebody's going to separate from his crop and give it to the Kohen. And by that same token, he's exempt from separating the Meiser from it. Although the Truma and the Meiser obligations take effect with the smoothing, there is no obligation to give these tithes for the portion designated Bikkorim. And in this respect, Bikkorim differs from Peah. And there's going to be, this reason is going to come about. So the Gemara is going to cite support for this ruling. Rabbi Chagai says in the presence of Rabbi Yosei, a Baraisa says as well, one gives produce as Peah always, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligation until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. And we already know from what we were talking about that once he smooths it, if there's Peah in that pile, he still has to give Peah, but now that Peah is going to be subject to Meiser. And again, big problem because now you're taking away from what the poor person would be getting. On the other hand, if you're overdoing the Peah on before it's smooth, now you're taking away from the Levim. Now, after you're smoothing it, because it's still in the possession of the owner, it didn't go to the possession of the poor person yet. Now you're coming to dedicate it. Well, now you're lowering the amount of Peah that would be coming to the poor person. So you have this big issue. Now, the Gemara is going to continue and it's going to say, but if he smoothed the pile of grain and then he designates the produce as Peah, he is obligated to give Meiser for it, which is not the case with regards to the Bikkorim. So it would seem that the Bikkorim is going to be different from Peah, and that the Bikkorim is going to be exempt from Truma and Meiser, even if they are designated after the produce is heaped into a pile and smoothed. And this is going to confirm the ruling made above. In other words, now you see this big difference between Peah and Bikkorim. And after you go and again, this is the big problem that you have when you do everything out of order. Torah commands you to do everything in order. You go, you smooth the pile, and now you're dedicating the Bikkorim. And the Bikkorim, they're saying, is not going to be subject to Truma and Meiser. So that's going to be something that's going to seem to be counterintuitive except as we go further, you're going to see the brilliance of the Yerushalmi, and you're going to see the brilliance in explaining the the even bigger brilliance of the writing of the Torah, and why the way the Torah is written about Bikkorim, you're going to see why this ruling has to be like this. So get ready, buckle your seatbelt, and you're going to start to see something really amazing in the Torah about the way Bikkorim is written, and why, if you're smoothing the pile and you forgot to leave Peah, now the Peah is obligated to Maestros after it's smooth, but with Bikkorim it's not. How come? And it's going to come to this amazing style and this amazing tradition of the way the Lakona Kodesh works, and the way the sages in Eretz Yisrael knew how to read the scripture, something that nobody alive today has a tradition for or knows how to do. But here we see in the Yerushalmi this amazing revelation that's going to explain it to us so that we can come up with a correct halacha, and we can know that after you're smoothing the pile, that Bikkorim would not be subject to Truma and Meiser. So Rabbi Yossi is going to reject the proof from the Baraisa by stating, hold on, let me just mute this. So Rabbi Yossi is going to reject the proof from the Baraisa by stating that another way of interpreting the Baraisa statement that this is not the case of Bikkorim. So the sugya is going to say, but say perhaps that the Baraisa means with regards to Bikkorim, he is obligated in Meiser even if he did not smooth the pile. And that's a question. That's not stated as a statement. It's stated as a question. In other words, the Rosh Cirillo is saying that about this sugya, saying that the Baraisa merely says that the law for Bikkorim is the same before Meruach and after, and that this does not mean that the Bikkorim is always exempt from the Meiser obligation, as Rabbi Haggai assumes. It can just be as well that the Bikkorim are always obliged in them, even when separating before. And the logic of this rebuttal is going to be really difficult to comprehend, because why should the Bikkorim become subject to Truma and Meiser obligations before the smoothing more so than any other gift to the Kohen? In other words, if you're going to say that the Bikkorim should be subject to Truma and Meiser even before they smooth it, well, that seems strange because there's no other thing that has that quality to it. So that would make Bikkorim stand out on its own, and it's a very strange and hard rebuttal to understand, because that would mean that that's off on its own, and that would have a quality that no other gift to the Kohen has. So what are they trying to say? In other words, they're rejecting the proof cited by Rabbi Haggai, and now Rabbi Yossi is going to give this explanation, and he's going to give support for this ruling that Bikkorim is exempt from Truma and Meiser after the smoothing. So here's what the sugya continues. This is from Rabbi Yossi. Rather, where is the one who states that this law, in other words, where is the source that teaches that Bikkorim is exempt from Truma even when they were designated after the smoothing of the pile? It is the following Mishnah. And why was their name called Bikkorim? Because they were the first to all other obligations that are given from the crop. And any other obligation that precedes its counterpart in the order of the obligations, its counterpart is subject to it, but it is not subject to the counterpart. So let me explain that. So because the gifts must be given in a specific order, it's gonna be that the second gift is Truma. And we know that in the Torah is going to talk about the Bikkorim separated from the produce as the first gift, Bikkorim. And then what should be separated after is going to be the third gift, is the Meiser Rishon. And that's meant to be taken from the produce that remains after the second gift, the Truma. And that has been separated and so on and so forth. So just as we know that there's no extra, just as we know that no extra Meiser is set aside to cover the amount previously removed for the Truma, rather the Meiser is calculated from a tenth of what remains. And so too, there's no Truma set aside to cover an amount previously removed from Bikkorim. In other words, you have an order. The Bikkorim comes first, and out of the Bikkorim, you're not designating a part of it inside of the Bikkorim to leave for other gifts. That's already the gift. That's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. That's already the gift. And just like with separating the Meiser Sheni or the Meiser Rishon from the Truma, that it's separated from what remains. So that, again, you can see here you have a big problem. If you're doing things out of order, now you have inside of it things that are other gifts that belong to someone else, and you made a big mess. But in terms of Bikkorim being the first of your fruits, in other words, that Bikkorim is the first gift, and then you're separating out from what remains. So inside, effectively saying, by definition, that first gift doesn't have inside of it Truma and Meiser, because the Truma and Meiser is what remains after you're giving the Bikkorim. So that's how we can understand that after you're smoothing the pile from the Bikkorim, you wouldn't be having Truma and Meiser because that's already the gift. Yeah, you did it out of order, but inside of that Bikkorim does not exist these secondary or tertiary gifts. Because again, it has to do with what remains. Now you have to go calculate after you smooth the pile and you didn't give Bikkorim, and now you have other gifts that are inside of it. Now you made a big problem for yourself. But from that 1/60th that you're taking out as Bikkorim, that doesn't have Truma and Meiser in it. That's what Rabbi Yossi is coming to teach us. So the Gemara is going to now give us a clue and is going to say who gave this anonymous Mishnah, this anonymous Mishnah that we were talking about, and is going to give the answer of, because it's moving on to the subject, it's going to talk about this anonymous Mishnah. Again, here's the anonymous Mishnah. It's going to say that and one may give produce as hefker, and he's exempt from the Meiser obligations on it until he heaps the produce into a pile and smooths it. And if you want to write down who you think this anonymous Mishnah is, I'll give you a moment. You can pause it and see if you get the right answer. You get a gold star if you get the answer right, because you'll never guess this. But it's amazing if you do, and if you do, give yourself a pat on the back. So the anonymous Mishnah is going to be the view of Bet Shammai, right? So that's really amazing. In other words, the Gemara now wants to move on and identify this authorship of this first ruling regarding Peah. And the Mishnah is saying that one gives Peah always, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligations until he heaps it into the pile and smooths it. And by adding the word always, remember that key always that I pointed out, the Mishnah is implying that as long as a produce is given as Peah, it will be exempt from Meiser. But where the owner had previously fulfilled his Peah obligation by leaving 1/60 of the crop, and now he wishes to add to that amount, in other words, now he's already smoothed it, now he wants to add and make it even bigger after he's smoothing it. So now you're going to have these issues. And since there's no longer any Peah obligation, this new designation does not actually take effect as Peah. Nevertheless, the Mishnah, by adding the word always, is teaching that even the new designation is exempt from Meiser. And the Gemara is going to explain this view according to Bet Shammai, and then I'm going to give the view from Bet Hillel, and then we'll end it for the day. So the Mishnah reflects the view of Bet Shammai. For Bet Shammai says that produce declared ownerless just for the poor is legally ownerless and thus exempt from Meiser. So in other words, what they're really saying is they're saying accordingly, any produce that's given as Peah and then left for the poor, even when the Peah designation does not take effect, is exempt from the Meiser because the owner has in effect declared it ownerless for an acquisition by the poor. So effectively, Bet Shammai is saying that if someone declares his produce to be ownerless just for the poor, his declaration has a legal standing, and the produce therefore becomes exempt from Meiser as the same as produce that's unconditionally Hefker. But Bet Hillel doesn't hold that way. Bet Hillel, there's a dispute, and they say that an owner's declaration of Hefker has no legal effect if the declaration limits the potential of acquisition to a single class of people. Therefore, if someone declared produce to be ownerless for the poor, Bet Hillel says it does not become ownerless at all. And even the poor have no right to take it. It is therefore not exempted from tithes. So the Rosh, in talking about the Mishnah, is going to say the following. He's going to say that according to Bet Hillel, wherever a Peah designation does not take effect as Peah, as in our case where the Peah obligation was previously fulfilled. In other words, in the field he already did it. Now they go and they smooth the pile. Now he wants to go and leave additional Peah out of this, right? And then he's saying, but this additional Peah is just for the poor, right? That they're saying that the produce, according to Bet Hillel, is neither Peah nor Hefker, since it was left only for the poor, and therefore, because it doesn't qualify, that amount that you've quote-unquote separated out still remains subject to Meiser. And thus, they dispute the Mishnah's ruling that giving produce merely is giving Peah, that they're saying that that you didn't really make it exempt from Meiser. In other words, Bet Hillel is coming along and saying that hey, Mr. Bet Shammai, your ruling looks like it's really strict, but in fact it's really lenient. Because what are you doing by saying that you can take this produce after it's been smoothed and you can say this produce is Peah and I'm leaving it just for the poor? That doesn't qualify as Hefker. It qualifies as Peah after I've already given Peah and after I've smoothed it. And you're saying that what you've done is because you can't designate out a class and say, well, only poor people can take it, that it's not Hefker at all and it's not Peah at all, and you've taken away from the Levim. So it looks like you've been very, very strict about the Peah side, except what you've done is created a leniency where you've actually been lenient and have actually diminished the amount of gifts that go to the Levim. That's really what Bet Hillel's point is. So that, again, you have this tug and pull on both sides between, if you take away over on this side before the smoothing, you've taken away gifts that could be going to the Kohanim. And if after the smoothing, now you're giving these things, now you can be giving, quote unquote, to the poor. Well, now you've taken away from you've diminished what the poor actually gets, because these things are actually subject to tithes. And according to Bet Hillel, because you can't separate out for a class and say, well, this only goes to the poor after you've smoothed it, that's subject to tithes. And because it's subject to tithes, you've diminished what you can actually give to the poor. So does that really fix the problem if you didn't give Peah and you're trying to now still do it after the fact? You're saying that, okay, I didn't give Peah. In the case that Bet Shammai is talking about, they're talking about adding to Peah you've already given. But now let's take the case of, hey, I didn't separate Peah at all. Now I want to do it after the fact. And now I have to separate out tithes. I'm calling this Peah. It's only going to the poor. and now they have to separate out tithes. You've diminished the amount that actually goes to the poor. And according to Bet Hillel, you can't even say after the fact that it can only go to the poor because it's already subject to Meiser. So the Gemara in this view is understanding the Mishnah, says the Rosh Cirillo, that the Mishnah is saying in effect that one can give Peah either as Peah or Hefker, where he already fulfilled the Peah obligation, and be exempt from the Meiser either way. But this Gemara points out the view of Bet Shammai, who holds that Hefker for the poor is considered Hefker. But again, the Bet Hillel doesn't consider that. So again, you can see the problem of leaving these things out of place, and you can see that you have a big problem here. Now, I want to read from the Vilna Gaon's explanation between this contrast between Peah and Bikkorim. So the Vilna Gaon is pointing out that the Gemara initially assumes that the law stated by Rabbi Abahu and the others teach that one who gives Bikkorim from a smooth pile is exempt only from Truma but not Meiser. And Rabbi Chagai cites the Mishnah in support of this distinction. And the Mishnah teaches that one who designates Peah after the smoothing is obligated to give Meiser. So since this Mishnah does not say that he is obligated to give Truma as well, Rabbi Chagai, says the Vilna Gaon, infers that he is in fact exempt from Truma and obligated only to Meiser. Although the Mishnah says this as regards to Peah, Rabbi Chagai assumes the same would be true for Bikkorim. So according to Rabbi Chagai, says the Vilna Gaon, both Bikkorim and Peah designated after the Merucha, the smoothing, is going to be exempt from Truma Gedola, but obligated to the Meiser. The Vilna Gaon points out that Rabbi Yossi concludes that this is not the case, and that there is in fact no difference between Truma and Meiser. So before the smoothing, Bikkorim and Peah are exempt from both Truma and Meiser, and after the smoothing, they are both obligated to them. So that, again, you have to look at the Ritvaz for another explanation. But you have various difficulties associated with these explanations. The Vilna Gaon is saying that he has a completely different reading from one who separates Peah from a smooth pile, that it's exempt from Bikkorim, and that is by the time that one made the smoothing, he is not yet designated either Peah or Bikkorim, and he is designated Peah before Bikkorim, where he designated the Peah being exempt from the Bikkorim. So the according to this, Rabbi Yossi is effectively saying that since the obligation of Bikkorim precedes that of Peah, it makes sense to say that the Peah is subject to the Bikkorim even before the smoothing. And so Rabbi Yossi is going to be concluding that there's no proof from the Mishnah whether the Bikkorim must be given from Peah, whether before or after. Now, just to point out that in talking about this difference between Bikkorim, that in Exodus, where in 23:19 it's calling Bikkorim, the Bikkorim of your land you shall bring to the house of Hashem your God. And there's a change in Bikkorim in Devarim 26:1 through 11, where the Torah does not use the word Bikkorim at all. Rather, it says Rishit Pri Hadama, the first fruits of the earth. So the Mishnah there is showing that this literal meaning of Bikkorim, the first ones, that because it's using these other terms to say that this is the first fruit, that it's effectively saying that this is the first one of the tithes. So effectively, what's happening is, because the Torah is saying the first fruit of the earth, it's saying that this is the specific order from how the tithes are supposed to be done. In other words, you're having Bikkorim, then you're having Truma, and then Meiser Rishon, and then Meiser Sheni. And so by using this term, the first ones and the first of your fruits, the writing of the Torah is effectively pointing out, says this sugya and this idea of Rabbi Yossi, that effectively that with regards to Bikkorim, that he's not obligated to Truma and Meiser after he smoothed it, because the way the Torah is written, they're saying that with these two different definitions in the Torah, that one being called the first fruits of the earth, and the Bikkorim of your land you shall bring to the house of Hashem your God, that this writing of the first fruits means that this is the first of the tithes. And so that's how we can understand why that after you're giving after you've smoothed the produce and the pile, that it wouldn't be subject because of the way the Lakona Kodesh works. And so you can see this difference between the elements of Peah and what Peah is, and the elements of Bikkorim, that there's a difference. So anyway, we're going to continue tomorrow with the rest of Halacha 5, chapter 1. And we're going to get into the rest of explaining the Mishnah and what happens when businessmen don't follow the oral law. And businessmen, they think they're so much smarter, and they're going to say, oh, this is just in the Torah, and I'm following just what's in the Torah, and I'm not going to follow what the sages say. And you'll see what happens. There's a special surprise tomorrow for the people who don't want to follow the ways of the sages. Have a great day.